Hello, Serious Survivor here. The end of time is a question, a debate, a thought pondered throughout civilization for a few millennia at the least. The end of time is something that has fascinated many people. Whether it's Planet X, the Mayan calendar, biblical prophecies, the rapture, supervolcanoes, alien invasion, artificial intelligence, and the list goes on. No matter what it is, every few years or maybe even every few months, a new story, new speculations, and new conspiracies will seem to go viral, all claiming that the end of the world is near. Some even claiming very specific dates. Others are much more vague. But the reality of things is we don't know when the end will come. We all know that the sun will one day die. It will expand and it will engulf the earth. But past that, there is no guarantee as to how the world will end. We're focusing on events that will happen on the face of the earth that would cause devastation on a level never before seen, and a level that may not be able to be survived, or possibly, if surviving, would be a very limited amount of humanity and little or no resources. So let's get started. Solar flares may seem like faraway events, but they can damage satellites and even ground-based technology and power grids. Every 11 years, the sun reaches its maximum activity and they become larger and much more common. And that increases the chances that one will significantly affect the Earth. So what is a solar flare? A solar flare is basically an explosion on the surface of the sun that ranges from minutes to hours in length. Large flares can release enough energy to power the United States for 1,000,000 years. Flares occur when the extremely powerful magnetic fields around the sun reconnects. And these are generally associated with the active regions of the sun. And these active regions are often seen as what we call sunspots. The sunspots are the regions in which the magnetic fields of the sun are the strongest. Solar flares are classified by strength, starting with B class, C, M, and X, the strongest. This is similar to the Richter scale for earthquake, but with this scale, each letter represents a 10-fold increase in energy output. So an X class is 10 times the output of an M and 100 times the energy output of the C. Within each letter class, there's a smaller scale that ranges between 1 to 9. C-class flares are too weak to dramatically affect the Earth. M-class flares can produce radio blackouts and minor radiation storms. It's the X-class flares that are the real danger or threat to the Earth. Although X is the last letter, there are flares that are more than 10 times the power of an X1, and that's why the X-class flares are not limited to the X9 scale. They go much higher. The most powerful X-class flares on record were in 2003 during solar cycle 23. It was so powerful that it overloaded the sensors in which were measuring it. The equipment cut out at X17, but the flare was estimated to be as high as an X45. An X-class flare of such magnitude can create long-lasting radioactive storms and cause much more damage to the infrastructure and the power grid throughout the world. The threat and the seriousness of an X-class flare impacting the Earth is a major concern for NASA and other scientific communities. But with advances in sophisticated and modern technology, NASA's new spacecraft or satellites can now view the sun from every angle, every aspect, in many various wavelengths. With these modern advances, it gives us a much better chance at predicting these types of events, such as large solar flares and even the worst CMEs. A mid to large-sized solar flare could send waves of high-energy radiation, X-rays, and ultraviolet light heading towards the Earth. These types of radiation are powerful enough to rip electrons out of atoms. That's exactly what they do when they hit the upper portion of our atmosphere that we know as the ionosphere. Basically, the sky will get hit with a giant electromagnetic pulse. But even the largest solar flares don't impact humans very much, but tends to be absorbed and deflected by the Earth's magnetic field. There is one exception to this though, and that's radio transmissions. Radio signals between the Earth and satellites can be blocked when the atmosphere becomes too charged. It takes about 8 minutes for sunlight to reach us, so about 8 minutes for a solar flare to hit us. Minutes to hours after a solar flare will light up the sky, a stream of charged particles, electrons, and photons arrive at the Earth. They bombard the magnetosphere, which is a protective envelope around the Earth created by our magnetic field. Occasionally, a large pulse of charged particles will hit satellites and damage their electronics. Now, particle radiation is also a big risk for astronauts in space. But generally, the effects of solar particle radiation are buffered by the magnetosphere and the atmosphere. It's what's coming next that you and me on the ground that we need to worry about, and that's the CME, or coronal mass ejection. When the sun flares up, it will sometimes shoot a giant cloud of magnetized plasma off into space, and this is called a coronal mass ejection, or a CME. And these are the slowest form of solar energy or solar weather, and it takes about 12 hours to sometimes several days for them to reach the Earth. But they are, by far, the most dangerous. Fortunately for us, though, because CMEs are very slow moving, our weather forecasters have a little more time to anticipate them. A CME will shoot pretty much straight out of the sun, and there's always a good chance that the Earth won't end up in its path because it's a pretty big space out there. If a CME is coming straight at us, it'll first hit NASA's ACE satellite located at the L1 Lagrange point, roughly 1,000,000 miles in front of the Earth. If that happens, we've got anywhere from 30 minutes to about an hour before a cloud of plasma rains down, interacting with our planet's magnetosphere and triggering a geomagnetic storm. That's when we start to see the effects on the power grid. This generates huge electrical currents in the upper atmosphere, and depending on how conductive the ground is, large currents can get picked up by power stations and fed into the grid, and that's bad news. Our grid isn't designed for huge amounts of currents coming out of the ground. Geomagnetic storm strength is measured in disturbance storm time, or DST, which generally describes how hard a CME shakes up the Earth's magnetic field. Ordinary storms, which cause the northern lights to flare up but really don't impact us, register on the average of negative 50 nanotesla. The worst geomagnetic storm of the space age knocked out power across Quebec in March of 1989, and this registered a DST of negative 600 nanotesla. Human society is far more reliant on electricity today than it was 150 years ago. We have pipelines, electrical transmission grids, and a lot more ground-based electrical conduction technology. So what would happen if a CME struck us now? Pretty much every aspect of the modern world would take a hit. The ground currents induced by the large geomagnetic storms can melt the copper windings of transformers that lie at the heart of our power distribution systems. And if this happens, it can definitely lead to massive power outages with little hope of recovery. And because our power grid has grown much more interconnected over time, the effects of a storm with this type of magnitude could spread far and wide, or pretty much worldwide. You can't really overstate just how much this would uproot our daily lives. The lights would all go out, and so would the internet, any device that draws current from the wall. In places with electronically controlled municipal water and sewage supplies, like most modern cities, toilets and sewage systems would stop working, heating and air conditioning would fail, perishable food and medication would be gone, ATMs would be useless, gas pumps would be offline, everything would go dark. GPS technology would also be knocked out. Our GPS system depends on the very precise timing of two signals between 2 points. If you place a bunch of energetic particles into the atmosphere, then that affects our GPS. This is extremely concerning, with over 50% of our aircraft landing with GPS technology. Some of these effects could last years, and they will be felt globally. The entire magnetic field of the Earth would be changed, and the Earth itself would change.
It's hard to imagine the social consequences of billions of power-hungry humans who are suddenly pulled off the grid without a moment's notice. But I'm sure we can all agree it would not be an easy event. And we do know for sure that the economic toll would be devastating. When we talk about a CME, we're not talking about some incredibly far-fetched Armageddon-style apocalypse situation here. We're talking about a real event that has occurred and will occur again.
Surviving this type of event will be very similar to the needs and aspects and supplies that are required to survive any type of grid down scenario. Some of the most immediate challenges that we would face in this type of event after the initial phase begins will be the loss or lack of goods, resources, and supplies due to transportation, communications, and information being at a standstill. But after the initial phases, the long-term survival aspect will basically be determined by the will of the survivors. As long as mankind can hold on to its humanity and morality and not fall into a state of chaos and destroy ourselves, then this is an event that we can absolutely recover from. Now, initially there would be an immense loss of life, and that would be due to not just the initial event causing immediate loss of electricity and power, plane crashes, car crashes, things such as that. But in the first year it would be more due to the fact that there is no heat, that people do not have food, people don't have medical supplies, and those types of aspects will take the most damaging toll on civilization. But after this aspect is over and after people have settled in, so to speak, even though the loss of electricity and the damage to the grid that has occurred with a CME or a massive CME, this is recoverable. And it's recoverable because of one thing: knowledge. The knowledge that we have now. For hundreds of years, mankind has built a civilization from the ground up. And during this time, we have acquired vast amounts of knowledge. So at this point, it's basically getting the resources back into place and getting production started back again so that we can repair some of these devices and get things back in order, so to speak. But that doesn't mean it's going to be that easy, because there are people who will thrive on this and there are people who will want it to stay this way. So this will once again come back to the will of the survivors, and who wants it the most and who's willing to sacrifice to get it. Well, that's it for the CME part of the series. Hope you enjoyed the video. A lot more coming out in this series on how or the ways the world may end, and we're going to look at some asteroid impacts and supervolcanoes and things such as that. So it's going to be a very interesting series. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe, and share the video to help out the channel so we can get more content out there. We really want to increase our production and increase the quality of the production, but it's hard to do on such a very limited budget as what we work on here. So thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And for now, Serious Survivor, out.